When Trump is finally revealed as an agent of foreign governments, will America finally wake up? I think it's time to tell the truth about Donald Trump. This guy has been an agent of organized crime and foreign governments literally for decades. In 1977, Donald Trump married Ivana. She's got a long and unpronounceable last name. Her father's name was Zelníčková, and her name was Zelníčková. There we go. Ivana. And, you know, she was a citizen of Czechoslovakia, which was part of the Warsaw Pact, a communist nation aligned with the Soviet Union. She was just buried on Trump's golf course, you'll recall. And that was the moment when their security service, their Statny Bezpieczeństwo, STB, began watching Donald Trump. And Ivana, his wife, began feeding information to her father, Milos Zelníček, about what Donald Trump was doing and about American politics and all this kind of stuff that were directly to Czech security services. And of course, they were aligned with the old KGB. This was back in the day. In fact, as The Guardian found back in 2016, quote, Ivana's father, Milos Zelníček, gave regular information to the local STB office about his daughter's visits from the U.S. and on his celebrity son-in-law's career in New York. Zelníček was classified as a conspiratorial informer. His relationship with the STB lasted until the end of the communist regime. So her dad was an informer for the secret police, basically, and they wanted to know all about Donald Trump. But it really went on steroids. And Craig Unger broke this story in his book, Collusion, The Secret Meetings, Dirty Money, and How Russia Helped Donald Trump Win. This was last year his book came out. But it really went on steroids, as Craig Unger documents, in 1987. In the summer of 1987, Donald and Ivana visited Moscow and St. Petersburg. And they did it through Intourist. Intourist was the KGB front that acted as a travel agent into Russia. And in fact, if you wanted to stay in Russia, you had to go through Intourist. Louise and I, when Russia was still the Soviet Union, when it was the Soviet Union, we visited Moscow once, and we had to go through Intourist. We had to stay at this really crummy hotel near the airport. It was insane. But, you know, I figured that they were, you know, that the tourist agency, they love to take you around and show you things and fill your head with stuff. And apparently, and this is a story told to us by Yuri Shevitz. And Yuri was a former KGB spy. And he had been posted to Washington, D.C. As the Moscow correspondent, or as the Washington, D.C. correspondent to TASS, the Russian news agency, throughout the 80s and early 90s. And in 93, he actually quit and became a U.S. citizen. And so this former KGB spy, from his own firsthand knowledge, tells this story of how in 1987, when Trump and Ivana went to Moscow, their handlers, through Intourist, were feeding Trump Russian talking points. You know, like presumably NATO's bad. So, and they also, the KGB, we now know, had determined prior to that time, in fact, as a result of the Czech Secret Service, that Donald Trump was not very bright and was vulnerable to flattery. Very vulnerable to flattery. And so his handlers, when he was in Moscow, in addition to telling him that NATO was a terrible thing and that, why is America protecting Japan and other democratic countries around the world? You should just let them stand on their own. They were also telling him that he should run for president. Seriously, in 1987. And so Donald Trump comes back from Moscow and immediately goes up to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where the first primary in the nation is held, and gives a campaign speech announcing that he's going to run in the Republican race for president. Now, very few people showed up, and it didn't go anywhere, so he didn't take it any farther than that, other than that same week buying a large newspaper ad in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Boston Globe that trash-talked NATO and U.S. support for Japan. Exactly what this KGB spy said Donald Trump had been fed a month earlier in his trip to Moscow by the KGB. This is what Donald Trump said in the ad. He said, quote, "Why are these nations not paying the United States for the human lives and billions of dollars we are losing to protect their interests? The world is laughing at Americans' politicians as we protect ships we don't own, carrying oil we don't need, destined for allies who don't help." The Guardian reported last year, quote, "The bizarre intervention," they're talking about, feeding all this anti-NATO information to Donald Trump on this trip to Moscow. "The bizarre intervention was cause for astonishment and jubilation in Russia. A few days later, Shevets, who had returned home by now, was at the headquarters of the KGB's first chief directorate in Yazanevo when he received a cable celebrating the ad in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Boston Globe by Donald Trump as a successful, quote, active measure executed by a new KGB asset, Donald Trump. It was unprecedented," Shevets said. "It was hard he would publish it under his own name and that it would impress real serious people in the West, but it did. And finally, this guy became the president." Meanwhile, Putin was making friends. Putin had been sucking up to Erdogan, the now dictator of Turkey. In 2016, there was a military coup, an attempted coup against Erdogan. He put it down and basically declared himself president for life and turned Turkey into an autocracy and started aligning himself with Putin. And he has been deepening his relationship with Putin ever since that 2016, the election year. And so the following year, that was when Erdogan first got in bed with Putin, was 2016. In January of 2017, Trump brings Mike Flynn into the White House as his national security advisor, the guy with the access to the top secrets in America, including our nuclear secrets. And Mike Flynn, it turns out, was a secret agent. He'd been paid $500,000 by Erdogan or more. It was a secret agent on behalf of Erdogan, who was, fronting for Putin. Now, nobody knows if this is when Trump began stealing national security secrets, including our nuclear secrets, and stashing them away in the White House residence. Nobody really knows, but hey, I think it's a reasonable speculation. Mike Flynn was convicted of lying to the FBI about his relationship with Turkey as a spy for Turkey with Erdogan, or as a front man or lobbyist or whatever you want to call it. An unregistered foreign agent, let's say. That was the language the FBI was using. And then on top of that, Trump's 2016 campaign manager, Paul Manafort, just last month admitted to the press that he was passing along the top secret confidential campaign information during the 2016 election from the GOP to Russian intelligence, presumably so that Russian intelligence could target via Facebook and other social media vulnerable voters in swing states. And they can get super granular, right down to the county level. Trump also was sucking up to arguably the wealthiest oligarch in the world, Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman. The tradition of American presidents is the first trip they make is to Mexico, Canada, one of the countries that's near us, that's a democracy, that the United Kingdom, that's historically aligned with the United States. Instead, Trump goes to Saudi Arabia, which was a huge PR coup for Saudi Arabia. And, the Crown Prince repaid the Trump family with $2 billion to Jared Kushner, $1 billion to Steve Mnuchin, and God only knows how many billions of dollars was sent to one of Trump's offshore accounts, because Trump, he's been working with organized crime since the 80s. He knows how to hide money. And, we have no idea how much money Saudi Arabia, if they did, gave to Donald Trump, and it just got stashed. Here's the bottom line. Democracies, even a flawed democracy like the United States, where, the Supreme Court has legalized bribery, political bribery, even flawed democracies like ours represent a substantial irritant to countries like Russia and China and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, which are not democratic, are not democracies. And if they can help Donald Trump crash democracy in America, destroy democracy in America, if they can help the Republican Party convince Americans that our elections are not secure, our elections are the heart of our democracy, so that American democracy collapses and we turn into a neo-fascist state, which is what Donald Trump was trying to do with a little help from Bill Barr and from Russia, then they win. And that's the end of America. That's the end of democracy around the world. And Donald Trump is still doing their work, by the way. Just yesterday, he phoned into a Washington, D.C. jail where where a bunch of the people being held on January 6th charges were holding a pro-January 6th rally to encourage them to not testify against him, I'm guessing. But hey, he's still trying to damage America. He's still trying to, and the Republican Party, and Fox News. I mean, you got these billionaire oligarchs who don't believe in democracy, and they're trying to damage America too, in my opinion. So where does this go? We'll just have to stay tuned, right?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So is using the plight of migrants as political pawns unlawful, immoral?